The knock on Marcus's door came at exactly 9 p.m., 3 hours after the evening news had broadcast leaked audio recordings of King Alexander's private phone calls to Lady Victoria. Marcus had expected this visit, but his heart still raced as he looked through the peephole to see two men in dark suits standing in the hallway. "Sir Marcus Thornfield?" the taller man said when Marcus opened the door. "We're from the Royal Protection Unit. His Majesty requests your immediate presence at the palace." Marcus grabbed his coat and followed them to the waiting car. During the silent drive through London's evening traffic, he thought about Queen Isabella's final words to him. "When they come for you, remember that the truth is the only protection you have." The palace felt different as Marcus walked through its familiar corridors. The usual bustling activity had been replaced by an eerie quiet. Staff members he had known for years avoided eye contact, and the few conversations he overheard stopped abruptly when he passed. King Alexander was waiting in his private study, the same room where he had once met with foreign dignitaries and signed legislation that affected millions of lives. Tonight, he looked like a man whose world was collapsing around him. "Marcus," the king said without looking up from the papers scattered across his desk. 15 years of loyal service, and this is how you repay me?" "Your Majesty, I made a promise to Queen Isabella." King Alexander finally raised his head, and Marcus was shocked by what he saw. The man who had always carried himself with regal dignity looked haggard and defeated. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled as if he had slept in them. "My wife," the king said bitterly, "who abandoned her duties and ran away like a common criminal. Do you know what your little interview has cost the crown? The pound has dropped 3% in 2 days. There are calls for a parliamentary investigation. Republican sentiment is at its highest level in decades." Marcus remained standing at attention, his military training taking over. "I told the truth, Your Majesty." "The truth?" King Alexander stood abruptly, sending papers flying. "The truth is that I'm human. The truth is that I made mistakes in my personal life that have nothing to do with my ability to serve the crown. The truth is that my wife could have handled this privately instead of destroying everything my family has built for centuries. With respect, Your Majesty, using royal funds to support a personal relationship isn't a private matter." The king's face flushed red. "Those were discretionary funds. Money that was mine to allocate as I saw fit. For charitable purposes," Marcus replied quietly. "Money donated by the people for the common good, not for personal relationships." King Alexander stared at him for a long moment, then sank back into his chair. "You really believe you're doing the right thing, don't you?" "I believe Queen Isabella was doing the right thing. She tried to handle this privately, Your Majesty. She spoke with Princess Charlotte, hoping to find a solution within the family. When that failed, she felt she had no choice but to protect the integrity of the crown." "Protect the crown?" The king laughed harshly. "Look around you, Marcus. Look at what your protection has accomplished. Half the Commonwealth is questioning whether monarchy has any place in the modern world. The other half is demanding my abdication. Is this your idea of protection?" Before Marcus could answer, the study door opened to admit Sir James Crawford, the king's private secretary, and Lady Catherine Ashworth, who had served Queen Isabella for decades. Both looked grim. "Your Majesty," Sir James said carefully, "the Prime Minister is here. He's requesting an immediate audience." King Alexander closed his eyes briefly. "Send him in." Prime Minister David Morrison entered the room with the measured steps of a man carrying the weight of government on his shoulders. He nodded politely to Marcus and the other staff members, then addressed the king directly. "Alexander," he said, dispensing with formal protocol, "we need to discuss your options." "My options?" The king's voice was hollow. "I assume you mean abdication or abdication." "The financial irregularities are serious," the Prime Minister said bluntly. "Parliament will demand a full investigation. The public will demand answers. And, frankly, the evidence that's emerged today makes your position untenable." Marcus knew he was witnessing history. The audio recordings that had leaked to the press earlier that evening contained King Alexander's voice promising Lady Victoria a flat in Kensington, paid for with royal resources. They also contained intimate conversations that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship or its duration. "What about Victoria?" the king asked quietly. "She never asked for any of this attention." Lady Victoria has released a statement through her solicitors, Sir James replied, consulting his notes. She acknowledges the relationship, but claims she was unaware that royal funds were being used inappropriately. She's returning all money received from royal accounts, and has expressed her deep regret for any damage to the crown. The king laughed bitterly. How convenient. She gets to walk away clean while I burn. Your Majesty, Lady Catherine spoke for the first time, her elderly voice carrying decades of royal service, if I may. Queen Isabella spent 25 years serving this country with dignity and grace. She never sought personal glory or recognition. She simply did her duty, day after day, year after year. When she discovered your betrayal, her first instinct was still to protect the crown, not to punish you. Catherine, the king began. No, Your Majesty, you need to hear this. Lady Catherine stepped forward, her small frame somehow commanding the room. Her Majesty could have gone to the press immediately. She could have taken her evidence to Parliament herself. Instead, she tried to give you a chance to do the right thing. When you refused, when your own sister chose to protect you rather than the institution you're sworn to serve, only then did she act. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Finally, King Alexander looked directly at Marcus. Where is she now? Marcus hesitated. Queen Isabella's location had been a closely guarded secret, known only to him and a handful of trusted associates. She's safe, Your Majesty. I didn't ask if she was safe. I asked where she is. I can't tell you that, Your Majesty. Can't or won't. Both. King Alexander nodded slowly, as if this final act of defiance had somehow settled something in his mind. Prime Minister, what exactly are you proposing? Abdication within 48 hours, Morrison replied without hesitation. A public statement acknowledging your mistakes and expressing regret for any damage to the crown. Full cooperation with the parliamentary investigation into the financial irregularities. And a commitment to make full restitution to the royal accounts. And if I refuse, then Parliament will begin impeachment proceedings. The investigation will become public and protracted. Every detail of your relationship with Lady Victoria will be examined in open court. The damage to the monarchy will be catastrophic and possibly irreversible. King Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline. 38 years as heir, 15 years on the throne. All destroyed because I fell in love with someone who wasn't my wife. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, it wasn't love that destroyed your reign. It was dishonesty. The king turned back to face the room. Marcus, do you think history will remember me kindly? I think history will remember that when faced with a choice between personal desire and public duty, you chose personal desire. But I also think it will remember that Queen Isabella chose duty, even when it cost her everything she held dear. Where is my wife now, Marcus? I'm not asking as your king. I'm asking as a man who needs to apologize to the woman he wronged. Marcus looked at Lady Catherine, who nodded slightly. She's writing, Your Majesty, her memoirs. She says the people deserve to know the whole truth, not just the parts that leaked to the press. Writing about our marriage, about everything, about her 25 years of royal service. Marcus corrected. About the challenges of modern monarchy, the sacrifices required to serve the crown, and the importance of integrity in public life. She plans to donate all proceeds to charity. King Alexander sank into his chair one final time. She always was better at this job than I was. 2 days later, Marcus stood in the crowd at Hyde Park Corner as Queen Isabella emerged from her car for her first public appearance since the scandal broke. She wore a simple blue dress and carried herself with the same dignity that had defined her reign. The crowd's response was overwhelmingly supportive. Cheers and applause that seemed to go on forever. King Alexander had abdicated that morning in a brief televised address. He acknowledged his serious errors in judgment and expressed his profound regret for the damage caused to the institution of monarchy. He had also announced his intention to leave public life permanently. Crown Prince William would be coronated within the month, with Queen Isabella serving as regent until the new king could fully assume his duties. The transition was unprecedented in its speed and complexity, but it was necessary to restore public confidence in the crown. As Marcus watched Queen Isabella address the crowd, speaking about duty, service, and the enduring values that the monarchy represented, he thought about the promise he had made to her 6 months earlier. He had told the truth, just as she had asked. The cost had been enormous, careers destroyed, a marriage ended, a reign cut short. But the crown had survived. More than that, it had emerged stronger, cleansed by honesty and renewed by the courage of a woman who had chosen duty over personal comfort. Queen Isabella's final words to the crowd that day would be remembered long after the scandal faded from headlines. The crown belongs to the people, not to those who wear it. Our duty is not to be perfect, but to be honest. Not to avoid mistakes, but to learn from them. Not to serve ourselves, but to serve something greater than ourselves. Marcus Thornfield retired from royal service the next day, his pension intact and his conscience clear. He had kept his promise to a queen who had trusted him with the most important secret of his life. He had told the truth, and the truth had set them all free. The morning newspapers hit the stands at precisely 6 a.m., and by 7, Marcus's phone was ringing constantly. He had expected this, but seeing the headlines still made his stomach twist with anxiety. Royal marriage in crisis screamed the front page of the Times, while the tabloids went further. Queen's secret escape and Palace insider speaks out. Marcus turned off his phone and made coffee with steady hands. He had given his exclusive interview to Sarah Henderson, a respected royal correspondent he had known for years. She was one of the few journalists who understood the difference between public interest and public entertainment. If anyone could tell this story with the gravity it deserved, it was Sarah. The interview had taken place 3 days ago in a quiet cafe in South London. Marcus had chosen the location carefully, public enough to be safe, private enough for honest conversation. Sarah had arrived exactly on time, her digital recorder and notebook neatly arranged on the small wooden table between them. "Marcus," she had begun, her voice gentle but professional, "you understand the magnitude of what you're doing here? Once this story breaks, there's no going back." "I know," he had replied, surprised by how calm he felt. But the Queen was right. The crown will only survive if people know the truth. Sarah had leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Then, start from the beginning. Tell me about the letters." Marcus had closed his eyes, remembering that December morning that seemed like a lifetime ago. Queen Isabella found them in the king's private safe. She had been looking for their anniversary gift, a watch that had belonged to his grandfather. The combination was their wedding date. She thought it was romantic. Instead, Queen Isabella had found 23 letters tied with a blue ribbon. Letters written in flowing handwriting that wasn't her own. Letters signed with love from someone whose name the Queen recognized immediately. Lady Victoria Pemberton, the King's former private secretary who had left royal service 2 years earlier to pursue other opportunities. The letters spanned 5 years. Marcus had told Sarah, watching her face for any sign of judgment. He found only professional attention. They started as professional correspondence, but quickly became personal. Very personal. The earliest letters had been innocent enough. Thank you notes for flowers sent during Lady Victoria's mother's illness, gratitude for the king's support during a difficult divorce. But, as Marcus recounted to Sarah, the tone had shifted dramatically by the 3rd letter. Lady Victoria wrote about how the king made her feel alive again after her marriage ended. She thanked him for showing her what real love felt like. By the 10th letter, she was writing about their stolen moments and how difficult it was to maintain professional appearances when all she wanted was to be in his arms. Sarah had made careful notes, her expression neutral. Did Queen Isabella confront the king immediately? No, Marcus had replied. That's what made it worse. She spent 3 days reading and rereading those letters, trying to make sense of dates and references. She cross-referenced them with the king's official schedule. Every charity dinner where Lady Victoria had accompanied him, every official trip where she had been part of the delegation, every late night at the palace that the king had explained as urgent state business. The pattern had been devastating in its clarity. For 5 years, King Alexander had been living a double life. The man who spoke eloquently about duty and sacrifice, who had renewed his marriage vows on their 15th anniversary just 18 months earlier, had been conducting a passionate affair with a woman young enough to be his daughter. The Queen told me later that the worst part wasn't the betrayal. Marcus had continued, his voice dropping. It was realizing how many people must have known. Lady Victoria didn't work in isolation. She had assistants, drivers, security details. The king's own protection officers must have been aware of their relationship. Yet no one had said anything. No one had warned her. Sarah had paused her note-taking to look directly at Marcus. Did you know? It was the question he had dreaded. But he had promised Queen Isabella complete honesty. I suspected, he had admitted. There were signs, small things that didn't quite add up. The king would sometimes return from official events in a better mood than when he left, especially if Lady Victoria had been present. She would find excuses to deliver reports to his office personally rather than sending them through normal channels. During state dinners, I noticed they never made eye contact, which seemed odd given how closely they worked together. But suspecting and knowing were different things, Marcus had explained. Royal staff were trained to be discreet, to look past the human frailties of their employers. The alternative, acknowledging what they saw, would make their positions impossible. The night Queen Isabella found the letters, she called me to her study. Marcus had told Sarah. She was sitting behind her desk, perfectly composed except for her hands. They were shaking so badly, she could barely hold her teacup. The Queen had asked Marcus to sit down, something that had never happened in 15 years of service. She had poured him tea from her personal china set and offered him biscuits as if they were old friends having a casual chat. Marcus, she had said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever seen anything that suggested my husband was unfaithful? Marcus had wanted to lie, to protect her from additional pain. But the Queen's green eyes had been so direct, so desperately hopeful that he might contradict what she already knew to be true, that he couldn't bring himself to add deception to her suffering. Your Majesty, he had said carefully, I have seen behaviors that might be interpreted as inappropriate. The Queen had nodded slowly, as if his confirmation had settled something in her mind. I see. And how long have you observed these behaviors? Approximately 3 years, Your Majesty. The silence that followed had stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Queen Isabella had stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens where tourists gathered daily, hoping for a glimpse of royalty. Those people down there, she had said softly, they believe in something. They believe in the crown as a symbol of stability, of enduring values, of commitment that transcends personal desire. What do you think they would say if they knew their king had been lying to them for 5 years? Marcus had struggled for an appropriate response. I think they would be disappointed, Your Majesty. Disappointed, she had repeated with a bitter laugh. Yes, I suppose they would be. Just as I am disappointed to discover that my marriage has been a performance for the past 5 years. The Queen had turned back to face him, and Marcus had seen something in her expression that chilled him. It wasn't anger anymore. It was resolve. Marcus, I'm going to share something with you that will put you in a very difficult position. You may choose to forget this conversation ever happened, and I will understand completely. Or you may choose to help me, knowing that doing so will likely end both our royal careers. Marcus had stood instinctively, his training kicking in. Your Majesty, I serve at your pleasure. No, Queen Isabella had said firmly. This isn't about royal service. This is about right and wrong. This is about whether the crown means anything more than ceremony and tradition. She had then explained her plan to Sarah. Marcus recounted to the journalist. The Queen hadn't just discovered her husband's affair. She had uncovered financial irregularities that suggested King Alexander had been using royal funds to support his relationship with Lady Victoria. Lady Victoria's sudden financial independence after leaving royal service hadn't come from a new job. Marcus had told Sarah, watching her eyebrows rise. The Queen found bank statements showing monthly transfers from a royal discretionary account, money meant for charitable giving and state expenses. The king had been paying Lady Victoria a substantial monthly allowance, effectively using taxpayer money to support his mistress. The payments had started small but had grown to nearly £10,000 per month by the time Lady Victoria left royal service. That's when Queen Isabella decided she couldn't just leave quietly. Marcus had concluded. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. It was about the king violating his oath to serve the people above himself. Sarah had sat back in her chair, processing the implications. So when the Queen left the palace that night, she was gathering evidence. Marcus had confirmed. Bank records, correspondence, anything that could prove the financial misconduct. She spent 2 weeks building an ironclad case before approaching Princess Charlotte. The meeting with Princess Charlotte had been a desperate attempt to resolve the crisis within the family. The Queen had hoped that King Alexander's sister might convince him to confess publicly and abdicate gracefully. Instead, Princess Charlotte had defended her brother and accused Queen Isabella of pursuing a vendetta. That's when the Queen realized she was truly alone, Marcus had told Sarah. Even the king's family was willing to protect him at the expense of the crown's integrity. Now, 3 days after giving that interview, Marcus sat in his flat watching the story explode across every news channel in the kingdom. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Palace has issued a statement denying everything. They're saying you're a disgruntled former employee seeking attention. Are you prepared for what comes next? Marcus typed back, I have documentation. The Queen made sure of that. Because that was the other part of the story, the part that would emerge in tomorrow's headlines. Queen Isabella hadn't just gathered evidence of her husband's betrayal. She had copied everything before leaving the palace that final night. And she had given it all to Marcus for safekeeping, knowing that when the time came, he would be the only one brave enough to tell the truth. Marcus Thornfield had served the crown for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like what happened that cold December morning. The palace corridors echoed with his measured footsteps as he made his final rounds before retirement. Tomorrow, he would no longer wear the crimson uniform of the Royal Guard. Tonight, he would break his oath of silence. The weight of what he had witnessed pressed down on him like a lead blanket. For months, he had watched the royal family tear itself apart behind closed doors while maintaining perfect smiles for the cameras. The public saw only what they were meant to see: carefully staged appearances, polished speeches, and choreographed charity events. But Marcus had seen the truth. It started 6 months ago when Queen Isabella discovered the letters. Marcus was stationed outside the Queen's private study when he heard the crash of breaking glass. He had moved toward the door, hand on his weapon, when the Queen's voice stopped him cold. She wasn't in danger. She was furious. 20 years, she had whispered, her voice carrying through the heavy oak door. 20 years of lies. Marcus had frozen in place, torn between duty and human curiosity. He knew he should move away, should give the Queen privacy in her moment of pain. But something in her voice, a raw desperation he had never heard before, kept him rooted to the spot. The Queen's personal secretary, Lady Catherine Ashworth, had arrived moments later. Marcus watched as the elderly woman hurried past him into the study, her face pale with concern. Through the crack in the door, he glimpsed papers scattered across the Persian rug and a crystal vase in pieces by the fireplace. Your Majesty, Lady Catherine had said softly, perhaps we should discuss this privately. There is nothing left to discuss, Queen Isabella replied, her voice steadier now, but carrying an edge that made Marcus's skin crawl. He has made his choice. Now I must make mine. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He had served 3 monarchs in his career, but he had never seen Queen Isabella break down. She was known throughout the kingdom for her composure, her strength in times of crisis. The people loved her because she never showed weakness. But what Marcus had witnessed wasn't weakness. It was the controlled fury of a woman who had reached her breaking point. The next morning brought the first signs that something had changed. King Alexander arrived at the palace earlier than usual, his face grim and his usual entourage notably absent. Marcus was assigned to escort him to the Queen's wing, an unusual request, since the royal couple typically moved freely between their quarters without formal escort. Sir Marcus, the king had said as they walked through the portrait gallery, how long have you served my family? 15 years, Your Majesty. 15 years, King Alexander repeated thoughtfully. You've seen us at our best and our worst, haven't you? Marcus had kept his eyes forward, but he could feel the king studying his profile. I serve at your pleasure, Your Majesty. Indeed you do. The king stopped walking and turned to face Marcus directly. And that service has always been exemplary, which is why I'm trusting you with something important. Marcus finally met the king's gaze. King Alexander's eyes, usually bright and confident, looked haunted. Dark circles suggested he hadn't slept much either. Whatever you may see or hear in the coming days, the king continued, I need you to remember that the crown is bigger than any one person. The institution must survive, even if individuals do not. Before Marcus could respond, they had reached the Queen's chambers. The king straightened his shoulders, smoothed his tie, and knocked on the door like a stranger seeking audience. When Queen Isabella opened it herself, another highly unusual occurrence, Marcus saw her face for just a moment before she composed herself. She had been crying. The door closed behind the king, and Marcus took his position outside. For the next 2 hours, he listened to voices rising and falling behind the thick wooden barrier. He couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a discussion, it was a battle. When King Alexander finally emerged, his composure had cracked. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and there was a red mark on his cheek that looked suspiciously like the outline of a hand. "Sir Marcus," the king said quietly, "please ensure that Her Majesty is not disturbed for the remainder of the day. She is unwell." Marcus had nodded and watched the king walk away, his shoulders bent as if carrying an invisible weight. Through the door, he could hear Queen Isabella moving around her chambers, opening and closing drawers with sharp, deliberate movements. That afternoon brought Princess Charlotte to the palace. The king's younger sister rarely visited without advance notice, but she swept through the main entrance like a woman on a mission. Marcus was reassigned to escort her to a private meeting room, where she waited alone for over an hour. When Queen Isabella finally joined her sister-in-law, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus positioned himself outside the door, but, unlike the morning's argument, this conversation was conducted in whispers and hisses that he couldn't penetrate. What he could hear were the occasional sharp intakes of breath and the sound of papers being shuffled. At one point, Princess Charlotte's voice rose just enough for him to catch a single word: disgraceful. The meeting lasted until sunset. When both women finally emerged, Princess Charlotte looked pale and shaken, while Queen Isabella appeared almost serene, the kind of unnatural calm that preceded a storm. "Sir Marcus," Queen Isabella said as Princess Charlotte hurried past without making eye contact, "please arrange for a secure car. I'll be leaving the palace tonight." "Your Majesty, shall I alert your security detail?" "No," she replied firmly. "Just you." "And Marcus?" She paused, studying his face with those intelligent green eyes that had charmed a nation. "What I'm about to ask of you goes far beyond your normal duties. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus had sworn an oath to protect the crown with his life. But, looking at Queen Isabella in that moment, seeing the pain she was trying so hard to hide, the determination in her stance, the way her hands trembled slightly despite her calm voice, he realized he wasn't just protecting an institution anymore. He was protecting a woman who had given everything to serve her people and had been betrayed by the one person who should have stood beside her. "I am at your service, Your Majesty," he said, meaning every word. That night, Marcus drove Queen Isabella to a small cottage on the outskirts of London. She carried only a single suitcase and a manila envelope that she clutched like a lifeline. During the hour-long drive, she stared out the window at the passing lights and spoke only once. "Marcus, do you believe in justice?" "I believe in doing what's right, Your Majesty." She had smiled then, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in months. "Good. Because tomorrow, everything changes." As Marcus helped her from the car that night, Queen Isabella turned back to look at him one final time. "When this is over, you'll be asked questions. Difficult questions about what you knew and when you knew it. I want you to tell the truth. All of it, Your Majesty. The crown will survive this," she said, echoing her husband's words from that morning. "But it will only deserve to survive if the truth comes out. Promise me, Marcus. Promise me you'll tell them everything." Marcus had promised, not knowing then what that promise would cost him. Now, 6 months later, sitting in his modest flat with his resignation letter already submitted, he understood exactly what Queen Isabella had meant. The truth was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. And, tomorrow, when the journalists came calling, Marcus Thornfield would honor his promise to the Queen who had trusted him with the most dangerous secret in the kingdom.